right, I'm hitting the bonnet once again with a wax and grease remover before we spray our high build primer. I've also taken a little bit of like filler putty and filled in a couple of the larger pinholes. That's that white area that you see on the bonnet. And I've also taped off the scoop area. We'll let that dry. And we'll mix up our high build primer. Okay, we got our 2K high build primer here, all stirred up. This particular stuff is mixed in a ratio of 3 to 1. And these handy dandy little paint cups actually have the ratios marked right on them. So to the A line for the primer, to the B line with the activator, and to the C line at 10 or 20% for your thinners. And now we pour it on our gun with a little strainer. That is about all we're going to fit in that pot. Now this tip on this paint gun is 1.5 mil, which is much larger than a normal tip. Normally you're shooting paint at about a 1.2 mil. And the reason for that, of course, is because it's such a high build primer. Blending in reasonably well. I thought I might have to do another fill along that seam there, but I think the high build primer might fill that in for me, which will be good. So we just continue sanding this bonnet down with a 180 grit and the longboard until the whole bonnet's sanded down. Now I've got the panel fully sanded down with 180 grit. And I don't know whether the camera will pick this up or not, but I've gone around and I've marked little areas of like air bubbles, a couple of divots that need to be filled in, etc. So I'll go and take my spot putty and I'll fill these little imperfections, sand them down, and then recoat the whole bonnet again in a high build primer. Well, it's been a couple of days since the last video shoot, and this is where we're at. The bonnet is now completed with the high build primer. So I've taken 3 coats of high build primer to get to where we're at. High build primer, block sand with 150, high build primer, block sand with 150, high build primer, block sand with 150. And what I was doing each time when I was applying that high build primer was laying in some of the low spots on the panel, filling in a couple of the pinholes that were on the panel, and just generally making sure that it was as dead flat as possible. And that's just so very important that you spend the time to be able to get to that stage where you've got dead flat panels. And that's where I think I am now. So the next stage in the process is we have to block sand this one last time before paint. Now, before I do that, I'm going to grab my cheap shitty old can of $2 paint, just a black paint, and I'm going to do a really light dusting across the bonnet. The reason for that is that's our last guide coat, and we'll end up sanding that completely off. Now my expectation is that we shouldn't have any hollows anywhere in this bonnet, so let's give this a shot of cheap crappy black paint and then sand it all off again. And that's it, one guide coat done. We'll let that dry and then we'll block sand it. Now these stickers basically sit right there on either side. Now I'm going to try something that could go very badly or could go quite well. rather than using stickers, which kind of look a little bit daggy in my opinion, I'm actually going to try and paint that and stencil it. So I'll use that sticker as a stencil. I'll paint the background one color, then I'll apply the sticker, then I'll paint the entire bonnet the second color. So what I'm going to do now is try and determine what colors I'm going to use. Obviously I know I'm going to paint the bonnet with 1G3, which is the color of my car, but what about the background? So I went to the local paint shop and got them to mix me up some Toyota Silver off of the 200 series. Now what I'm uncertain of is whether this silver is actually too silver or too bright. So what I'm going to do is I got 4 test pieces of metal here. I'm going to spray the pure silver on one and put the other half 1G3. On the next one I'm going to mix that silver with 75%, 25% silver to graphite. Next one 50-50 silver to graphite. And the last one 25-75 silver to graphite. And I'll have a look at those 4 little paint chips and determine which one I like the better and use that for my stencil. Of course it's going to look a little bit daggy because it's got brush marks in it and everything, but for this exercise that'll suffice. Then what I'll do is I'll let that flash off. I'll get some cheap rattle can enamel clear. Just shoot it over the top of this just to give it a little bit of gloss. I don't even know whether this super cheap enamel is even compatible with this acrylic that I laid down, but anyway, doesn't matter. I'd say it's not, because it's just discolored the silver into a brown almost. Well, it's a good thing I had decided which color mix I liked before I hit it with this crap. So the 100% silver I wasn't super keen on. It just stood out, it popped too much. And the 25% I wasn't keen on because it sort of got hidden a little bit. It's probably really hard to see in the camera. That's 100, 75, 50, 25. And I think I'm going to go with the 50-50 mix. So I'm starting to block out the last coat of this high build primer, or what I expect to be the last coat. And I found a little bit of a trap for the uninitiated, which I've fallen into. The guide coats I've been using up to this point in time have just been cheap rattle can guide coats, but it's been a matte black, and that sanded off pretty easily. I ran out of that and just grabbed another can off the shelf, which was a gloss black, and the gloss black plugs the paper up really, really quickly. So what that means is I've had to go in with a little bit more aggressive paper. I'm starting with a 240 just to take the tops of that gloss black off, allow me to get down to the high build primer where I can start with my 320. That's just a wire brush that helps me keep the paper clean with all the black stuff that's getting clogged up in it. Okay, I finished block sanding with 240 and basically taken all of the shine off of that guide coat. So now I'm going to move on to a 320 and we'll block the entire bonnet out with 320. So our bonnet is now sanded down with 320. If you can see, I've left a little bit of guide coat in places, and the reason for that is when I'm moving up in grades of sandpaper, so going from 320 to 400 for example, I take a little bit more guide coat off, and that way I know I'm getting the scratches out of the bonnet from the previous grade of paper that I've used. Okay, there's our bonnet sanded down with 400 grit. And I am stoked at the way that this has come out. The lines are perfect. There's no high spots or low spots. It's beautiful. I'll take you for a walk around it. putting a solid color on, 400 grit is fine. If you're putting a metallic down, the recommendation, wherever I heard it, was to take it down to 600 grit. And the argument for that is there's still obviously very fine 400 grit scratches in it. And the paint, the metallic paint, has fleck inside of it. Think of it like this. The fleck can end up in those 400 grit scratches in a vertical position. And when that metal fleck is like that, it obviously doesn't reflect any light. You don't see it. But if you take it down to a 600 grit, those metal flecks will actually all lay out flat on the panel. Now, whether that's bullshit or not, I'm not sure, but it makes sense to me in my logic center of my brain, so that's what I'll do. I'll sand this down to 600 grit. Now, before I do that, I'm going to flip the bonnet over, and I'm actually going to paint the underside of it and get the underside finished. Just in case I get any overspray from when I'm working on the underside, I've got one more sanding on the top side at 600 grit, and that would get rid of any of that overspray that might happen. I don't expect any, but I don't want to take any chances. Looks bloody awesome. Now, you might recall from video 1 that I've already scuffed the underside of this bonnet, but I've obviously since shot a coat of etch primer on it. And that's what I'm doing now. Just a Scotch-Brite pad, brown Scotch-Brite, scuffing it up, and that'll be the surface that we use to shoot the paint. I'm going to actually use this as a good practice bed for shooting the color on the other side, because I've got very limited experience in painting, and I've got no experience in shooting metallics, only just solid colors. So this is one giant experiment for me. Okay, that's all scuffed down with Scotch-Brite. Okay, I'm ready to lay down a coat of color base. And I've got a very small window of opportunity between the thunderstorms here. So we'll start here, work our way into the middle, and then grab the wet edge from there and pull it to the other side of the bonnet. And that's it for coat number 1. We'll wait for that to tack up and then throw a second coat down. This will be my third and final coat of base, and then we'll hit it with clear. Alright, time to shoot the clear. Alright, we'll let that tack up and then hit it with a second coat. Well, there's the underside of our bonnet painted, and came out pretty good. Pretty happy with that. So what I'll do now is I'll mask that off, flip the bonnet over, and we'll start the prep work on the other side. I caught up with the boys at Queensland Paint Supplies, and in particular I got to give a shout out to Eric and Tony. Those guys were just enormously helpful for me when I went down. I actually went down to mix up some paint to match the paint color, because apparently 1G3, the Toyota 1G3, comes in a multitude of different shades, and the shade that I had was just a little bit more blue than what the car actually was. So those guys actually hand mixed this paint for me and matched it up beautifully. I'm out at Queensland Paint Supplies, and Tony and Eric have been matching up some paint for me, which is just bloody awesome, and Eric has got it spot on. It's brilliant. Can't thank these boys enough.
play every day, mate, even on the flip, bit of clear.
That is sensational, boys.
Yep.
Legends.
I told you I taught him everything he knows.
So I can't thank them enough for that. But they also gave me some tips and advice. I told them I was intending to sand the bonnet down to 600 grit. They also suggested I take it down to 800 grit. And since I've got some 800 grit paper, that's no sort of skin off my nose. So I'm going to listen to the professionals, and that's what we'll do. The other thing that Eric suggested, or that Eric offered, which was just fantastic, he said, listen, mate, why don't you bring the bonnet down to us, get it inside the paint booth, and we'll shoot it in the paint booth. And that offer was just very, very enticing, obviously, and quite attractive. But I'm of two minds, to be honest. Obviously, the paint job that Eric can do in the booth with his skill set would far and away outstrip anything that I could do, so I'd get a much better quality job in the end. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is I've done this all here in the shed on my own and got this far along. So it's, I don't know, I'm kind of like throwing in the white towel a little bit, I guess. At least that's the feeling that I've got if I don't carry this through to completion. So I'm just not quite sure which way I'm going to jump on that one yet. Now the purpose of sanding this, of course, isn't to pull out any low spots or high spots or anything like that. All that work is already done. This is simply pulling out the 400 grit scratches using the 600 grit paper, and then I'll pull the 600 grit scratches out using the 800 grit paper. Now there's our bonnet sanded out with 600. And I'm just looking down the lines for imperfections. And I must admit, I'm pretty pleased. It's going to be very, very kick-ass on the car. Cut out a hole in that sheet. So those stickers will end up going, or those stencils will end up going. So that will allow me to spray the backing color in that small area without getting too much overspray on the bonnet. Well, I've given some pretty serious thought about Eric's offer to shoot this bonnet for me over at Queensland Paint Supplies, and I think I'm actually going to pass on it. And the reason for that isn't arrogance, in that I think I can do a better job than he can, because I know I can't. He'll be able to do a much more high quality job in a professional environment. But I have done the entire bonnet so far myself here in the shed, in the backyard. And I just want to take that through to completion. So that's my reasoning. Hopefully it doesn't bite me on the ass, but you know what? If I do screw it up, I can always sand it back again and go with my tail between my legs and say, hey Eric, I tried, mate, and I failed. Can you give me a hand? So there's that. Next step, taking the mixture of 50/50, 1G3 and 1F7, and I'll spray in these panels to start my stencil work. Right, so that's 3 coats of color down. Let that flash off and we'll get this plastic out of here. Sand down any of the overspray, like the sharp edges, with 800 grit. And then put the decals down. So I've got some 1000 grit paper here. And I will just go along and sand the very edges here and blend them in to make sure that we don't have a little bit of a ridge. So we're all sanded out now, and I'm putting these decals down, which are in effect a stencil. That'll work for my purposes. Now we'll do the other side and then start prepping the bonnet for paint. Well, both decals are on now, or stencils are on. I have got the paint mixed up. I'll do one last wax and grease remover pass. Alright, we're ready to shoot some color. Just run over the bonnet briefly with this tack rag. Make sure we've got all little bits of dust and crap off of it. Okay, we'll let that flash. Hit it with a second coat. Got 2 coats of color down at the moment. Just waiting for that to flash off. And then we'll go in and lay down a third. And maybe a fourth, but certainly a third. So far, knock on wood, we're doing okay. Well, as you can probably see, I got a little bit of a drip there where the sweat dropped out. Giant pain on the backside. So I'll wait for that to flash off. I'll sand it down with a bit of 1000 grit and we'll go with another coat of color over top of it. Well, that paint has now flashed off and it looks pretty bloody good, I think. Now comes the part that could be a giant failure. I'm going to pull these twin turbo V8 stickers off without lifting the underlying paint. Ooh, it's not as tricky as I thought it was going to be. That solvent must have softened up these stickers. Nice. That looks cool. And it doesn't stand out like dog's balls. It's a nice subtle look. And with a clear coat over top of that, ooh, 6A. Well, it's the following morning and we're ready to shoot some clear. I'm hitting the bonnet once again with a bit more wax and grease remover, just in case any crap landed on it last night. Hit the bonnet with a tack rag, get any loose dust floating around on it or sitting on it. And we're ready to shoot the clear. It's all mixed up, ready to go. The first coat that I lay down will be a very light sort of dusting, and that is to give the subsequent coats something to stick to. Kind of think of it like this. Right now, the bonnet is quite slick and the paint can slide off of it. By putting a small tack coat onto it, the next coat that I spray down will be spraying onto something that could kind of be akin to the sticky side of sticky tape. There's our sticky tape laid down. Time to lay down the second coat of clear. That's where the magic starts now. right, third coat down. I can see that I've got a couple of bits of dust and crap in the paint, which is to be expected when you're shooting outdoors. So I think we'll go one more coat of clear, call it quits, and that'll put a nice layer of clear down so we can go in and color sand. Well, there it is, clear coat finished, everybody. And I must say, I am absolutely stoked with how it's turned out. No runs, very minimal orange peel, and only a little bit of crap in the clear coat from, dust and crap like that. We'll sand that out after this clear coat goes off in a few days' time, and then go on to the install. So that's it for this particular episode, everybody. You'll have to tune in next week when we do the big reveal. I'll have it installed in the cruiser, and I think I will do some inlet air testing as well, with and without the scoop, and see whether it actually makes a difference from an IAT point of view. But that's it for this one. Keep the shiny side up, everybody, and we'll see you next week with the big reveal. Have a good one.